Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.co.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources, all backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio.
Well, g'day Mick, we're back for another one, episode 4 of season 2, so we're starting to chalk the runs up on the board here as well.
Mate, yeah, like I said, I've said this from the start, the sequel's always better than the original, so, no one's pulled us off there yet.
I think you just changed your tune and whatever mood you're in, I think so.
If I tell you once, I'll tell you a million times. I never tell lies. Life update, HIIT sessions, exercise 4x4 Norwegian, study protocols, getting a little bit easier. I'm up to 3 minutes. It's only taken me a month, but I'm getting there.
Very good.
Slowly but surely.
And what about after our chat with Eric last week about hypertrophy training versus strength and sets and reps? Have you changed anything like with your weight regime after listening to him?
No. I've been, to be honest, I've been going consistently now in the gym for the best part of a year, and I would comfortably go to a point where I'd get to 8 reps and have fun left in the tank. So I feel like I have been consistently going to that failure point. What I need to probably play around with is, on the days where I'm not feeling that great, or just, maybe a bit extra sort of niggly or sore, is maybe lighten the load up and push through and get that muscle exhaustion and that true failure point at 15. Rather, or even higher if I want to, rather than sort of, keep being stubborn and aiming for this sort of, 8 rep max kind of area I've been sort of sitting in for a while. No, I enjoy that. I enjoy that intensity. It's not too heavy that I feel like I'm going to get crushed by the bar. It's not too light that I get that really uncomfortable kind of muscle burn. Yeah, and I kind of like that. And I think importantly, like we've always said along, do you, and what you do, what works for you. And so for me, it kind of sits nicely in that sort of 6 to 8 rep range, and I like sort of tapping out about there. So I haven't made any wholesale changes. No, not yet.
Very good. Now, what do we got on the cards for today?
I got periodization, it's a word that gets thrown around quite a lot in elite sports science circles and probably elite sporting teams. But I certainly wanted to come at it a little bit today with a bit more of general population lens and trying to see can and should we, be encouraging our everyday clientele and our everyday patients and, people trying to get the best out of their training. Yeah, some better structure, I guess, like periodization we'll talk about in a second, is you've got different ways you can sort of plan and map out your training weeks and months and your calendar year, and there's different strategies you can use to employ it, and certainly elite sporting teams would sort of have their preferred strategies. But I would be comfortable in saying I think most of the general population don't have a plan when it comes to exercise, or if they do have a plan, they probably struggle to sort of keep to it consistently. So I guess that's probably where we wanted to land today. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. And I've called in once again the experts and the big guns, and I've got a gentleman called John Kiely. John Kiely's an Irish man, academic, a strength and conditioning coach, performance consultant and senior lecturer in Ireland, University of Limerick, from what I understand, and a wealth of knowledge in the terms of in regard to periodization. He's worked with many elite sporting clubs, including UK Athletics, Munster Rugby, Irish Rugby, Football Club, or the World Cup football squad for 2018 campaign, and a variety of Irish sporting clubs around the countryside. So yeah, really strong depth of knowledge John had when we talk about periodization. And it's actually got a really interesting take on it. So, yeah, I can't wait to sort of share that with the audience and talk about the topic of periodization over the next half an hour or so.
No, I'm looking forward, I should say, to what he's got to say also. And I think you make a really nice point that for the performance end of sport and the elite end of sport, periodization is a given. But for a lot of people who just enjoy exercise, that, from my perception anyways, they just like holding patterns. It's like I run 3 times a week, I do gym 3 times a week. And I think the question we hopefully can answer with this podcast is that okay? Or should people ebb and flow and should they look at periods of surging and doing a little bit more and some periods where they have a break? Looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, and we'll sort of, probably, obviously stop and come up for air in between our little sort of bits and pieces. But yeah, I think, it'll be interesting. And we've got a lot of discussion points here that I think will help people navigate their training. And I'll probably set the tone too. I will sort of acknowledge that, John's background probably recently been a little bit more involved in team sports, and that's probably where periodization might be a little bit different compared to our everyday population who's, going to the gym and training. Or, we've got triathletes who might be trying to get a mixed bag of aerobic work and anaerobic work and resistance training. So it can get quite complicated depending on the person sitting right in front of you. And the papers that I do talk about are a little bit more geared towards resistance training, periodization, to get the best out of strength training and hypertrophy gains. But once again, we're probably, limited by time and what we can fit into half an hour. So hopefully it gives people a good sort of overriding understanding of what periodization is and can it be helpful and what strategies work for some. And obviously, if you want to go for a deep dive into the space, there's a ton of online resources out there to sink your teeth into. So,
yeah, all right, let's get into it.
Yeah, well, I'll first kick off before we sort of throw to John and sort of get his sort of thoughts and feelings about periodization. But periodization, in a nutshell, is basically planned variations in load, reps, volume, and intensity across time to hopefully, and with the theory being that it will drive adaptations within the body and encourage you to get positive changes, whatever the training goal is. If you want to get strong, then we plan for gradual increases in strength parameters in the gym, and we sort of plan for increases where we can, but also to manage the effects of fatigue, because ultimately when you're training for strength, endurance or power or whatever it is, there's going to be a knock-on effect where your body will come to a point where it probably can't sustain this. So we need to find periods of time where you might need to knock it down a notch to let your body catch up to the training. Now, there are a few different models out there, but I guess the core models that do exist that have been looked at fairly extensively in research papers are 5. So we've got a non-periodized model, which is effectively an unplanned model where you just follow the same sets, reps, load, week in, week out. And for the vast majority of people, they do that and wonder why they're not getting any stronger or why they're plateauing. Then we have linear. Linear is a gradual shift in training from a high volume, low intensity to a low volume, higher intensity kind of program. And then countering that, we've got a reverse linear, which is the opposite, where you start heavy loads and low reps, and then you trend in the reverse fashion where you work through, for example, lighter weights and higher reps. So they're our linear cycles. Then we've got undulating, which is frequent, either be it daily or weekly changes in reps and loads from a strength point of view. So a daily undulating pattern, for example, would be day-to-day variations of load each week. So you might say on a Monday, do 3 sets of 10 at a reasonable weight. On Wednesday, you might come in and do 4 sets of 6. And then on the back end of the week, to sort of, I guess, ease yourself into the weekend, you might do 2 sets of 25s just to really lighten up and get a burn. So that would be a daily undulating pattern. And then week to week undulating patterns would be similar vein, but you're keeping the sets and reps the same for those 3 training sessions per week. And then the next week you'd make a change, either go up or drop down, depending on what your training goals are. So they're the kind of the core periodization models. I guess what we're going to try and keep it really simple here is that probably going to look at mostly linear progressions and undulating progressions today, because they're the couple of key papers. So to put it simply, the linear model would be a slow gear shift change, meaning that we've just got gradual movement in sets and reps and load slowly over time. And it's really usually effective for novices. And then conversely, if we're looking at our undulating patterns, be it daily or weekly, it basically is frequent gear changes. Okay, so we're constantly rotating through sets and rep ranges, really getting the body to constantly guess and try and figure out what the hell you're doing. So linear is a straight climb, undulating is a rolling staircase. So there's some really simple, I guess, hopefully simple ways to explain what some of the periodization models are, and the ones that do exist, and yeah, be a nice place to kick things off.
All right. They're good definitions, so let's see what John's got to say.
Yeah, so John had a little bit to say, so I'm just going to play the clip now and give you guys a listen.
So yes, there are a number of models. There's, to name check them, there's lots of different types, all proposed by different theorists. Maybe I can just shortcut this and say I think they all make the same basic mistake. Now, we could throw out the names: conjugate sequence, traditional, block, there's lots of buzzwords and slang terms. Where I spend most of my time is in kind of high performance sports contexts, and people throw out those terms, but very few people, if you dig a bit deeper, can really separate between the models, and as practitioners, and they kind of don't need to. But I made a big statement there, and it was like, I don't think it really matters. I don't think what they're all doing is they're all recommending that you parse out training and intensity and volume in different ways. Now, some will say it needs to be this time frame. You need to sequence things like, let's say hypertrophy, strength, endurance, power. You need to sequence those in different ways, different arrangements for different time frames. The whole premise of periodization, just to, this will be the fastest podcast ever. We're finished after this statement. The whole premise is that adaptation is predictable. And if we do this for this amount of time, then we'll get this result, and we'll then be ready to move on to section 2, which we're going to pre-plan now, which is doing something different for another, always suspiciously same duration, but we're going to sub in something else, and then this will happen, and then we'll add on another block to this chain, and then you'll be ready for your competitive peak. I don't mean to sound disrespectful to all those, periodization experts, but that's what it is, and it's all about prediction, and it's all about, and all the different systems and methods are making different basic assumptions about how you should time frame, sequence, and layer on or ramp up or downgrade intensities and over that time period. But again, I'm not being disrespectful, but my premise is, and based on the evidence, you can't predict adaptation. We're not even close to predicting adaptation. There is no universal time frame that you can just go 6 weeks of this, then 4 weeks of that. Doesn't exist. Yeah. It is a fiction.
So John, he sort of threw me when I first asked him about that. He was, without being critical, I loved his honesty, and I think that was kind of a really enlightening chat. Was that, I guess his criticism of periodization models is that, I think they've been effectively compared against, I guess maybe faulty study designs, or maybe not compared to against like the best particular model. So he's certainly seen limitations in periodization, but I did like how he kind of, did sort of bring it all together, saying that, effectively periodization is sort of training in a particular way to get an outcome. And that's, that in essence is what we're doing here. And then at the end of that stage, then that'll sort of drive the next block of training, which will be the next block of training. And I think that mindset about, planning a particular training block to achieve outcome should be the thing that we probably keep front and center of mind rather than trying to make things ultra confusing and challenging, particularly for everyday populations. I think for the vast majority of people, where we just need to not lower the bar to a really low standard, but we do need to make the entry point into exercise a lot easier and less complicated for most.
Yeah, and the thing that came to me as John was speaking was the reflecting on my time in elite sport, and everyone's on a different program, even individually within a team or a club, because everyone does respond differently. And I suppose we've spoken about this a few times in different episodes, is that when research is done, research will look at program A versus program B. And if program A is superior to program B, then everyone should do program A, and that's what the scientists and the researchers will say. But when you get to the coalface of sport, is that you try that and you go, hang on, this hasn't worked for everyone, and you need to individualize everyone's program to get the most out of them. And it also will depend on kind of what the goals are for that athlete, the timings of the sport, whether they're going for an Olympic Games versus like a full football season, for instance. So there's so much variation here that I agree with him. I think it's really hard to kind of have a study that's the gold standard and everyone does it.
Yep, agree. And I like the overriding message with John is, and we will probably get to this, is that it's not to discount having a plan. I think even within what he just said there is that, you build for a certain period of time. It's like within that certain period of time, be it 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And once again, we probably don't know what is the right amount of training weeks before we kind of move on to the next block of training. But whatever that time frame is, there's still got to be a plan within that. And I think that's probably what's been clear in the evidence to say is when we're looking at comparing a particular way of training and planning a training cycle compared to having no plan, a plan wins. A plan wins each and every day of the week. And I think that's probably where the criticism comes from.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So now taking a dive just for a few minutes into some systematic reviews that do sort of talk about the different types of strategies for strength training and hypertrophy and the different kind of models that have been looked at. So as always, a systematic review is what we'll talk about, and a meta-analysis. So this one particular paper by Mosgaard and colleagues from 2022, published in Sports Medicine, was 35 studies ranging from a period of 6 weeks through to 36 weeks with individuals who had what was called a mixed training status. So, trained versus untrained people. Of the 35 studies, 19 were male only, 7 were female only, and then the remaining 9 were mixed. So once again, big bias towards male populations. So nearly half of the studies included in this were male only. So once again, a bias there. Ages of this range greatly from our adolescents all the way up through to over 50-year-olds. So to breaking it down, of the nearly 1,000 participants looked at in this systematic review, 130 were adolescents, so about 10%. 79% were roughly adults, and a further 10% were older adults, older than 50. So big chunk of that kind of 18 to 50-year-old age group were looked at here. The key findings here were that if we're looking to develop strength, and remember we'll probably sort of reflect on Ed's talk last week, strength and hypertrophy, they are two distinct parts of training, and they're not synonymous. We can't use the words interchangeably. They are completely different things. Strength and hypertrophy, when we might go back, if you hadn't heard that podcast, certainly go back and listen to Eric's chat. Strength training compared to no plan, surprise, surprise, periodized training wins. So what type of periodization? It did find that a linear periodization plan for strength training versus undulating plan. Undulating plans were superior to a linear plan for strength training in trained lifters. So there was certainly a little caveat there. So if you want to get strong, undulating plan better than linear, but really only in trained. Hypertrophy training, no differences at all between groups, between a linear plan or an undulating plan. To put it into perspective, in people that kind of just rolled up and just trained with no specific plan in place, they did find that over the course of either a 6 to 36 week training cycle, there actually was a gain in 1 RM strength. The gains were probably seen early. Like anything, when you train early, the first 4 to 6 weeks, you get those neuro benefits rather than sort of, pure biology benefits. A touch under 2%, so 1.77% week gains in 1RM status was seen over the course of the training protocol. But the periodized plans did come out ahead with 2.13% gains, which it's if you stack them up, over a 10-week cycle or a 12-week cycle, that's going to be 24, 25% versus 15%. So like in 1RM. So yes, it doesn't look much on a per week basis, but on over a 10, 12-week training cycle, there's certainly strong legs there for plan.
Yeah, I think
training.
also, you got to also remember is the bias of being in a study as well. So even if you're in the control group, but you've had to kind of put your name on the line of ethics, and you're going to do outcome measures at the start and outcome measures at the end, you'd think if you're going to say, listen, we're just going to assess how you go with your own training program over that time, people will think, I'm in a study, I better do my homework, I better lift strong, and that they're going to improve anyway. So I think that we've also got to think about, does this apply to the real world? And that, I suppose the same is true for the periodized groups as well. But yeah, it's interesting to see that periodization does work for most people.
Yeah. So the strong take-homes here and the practical takeaways here, if strength is your training goal, they do recommend that undulations in your training, either day-to-day or week-to-week, doesn't particularly matter. That's what will sort of help you get strong and improve your strength outcome measures. If hypertrophy, though, is your focus, doesn't particularly matter too much if it's a periodized training plan, either undulates or not. What matters the most is that you hit your adequate volume in your training of building hypertrophy and breaking your muscle down. So fairly high-ish, like Eric talked about, I think we had as low as 8 reps or something like that from memory, but most sort of hypertrophy training programs do probably sit a little bit higher than that, but there is a bare minimum that you can achieve. But volume matters when it comes to hypertrophy training, as opposed to how you sort of structure and undulate your plan.
Yeah, no, that's right. Good. Okay.
Yep. So that was paper 1. Paper 2, a similar systematic review from 2017, does periodize. This is from Williams and colleagues, 2017, once again published in the Sports Medicine Journal. Does periodization training beat non-planned training for improvements in 1RM? So this one was more so dialed into strength measures as opposed to hypertrophy measures. This one was a meta-analysis of 18 studies that looked at things like squat, bench press, leg press, and traditionally 1RM type outcome measures. So remember, I think he explained it beautifully in one of our early kind of podcasts, was that one repetition max test, for those that aren't familiar, is, how much weight can you just lift one time, be it on a squat, bench, leg press, whatever it is. Once again, heavy bias towards males in this systematic review. 65% of the participants were males, 32% females. Ages were across the lifespan of 15-year-olds all the way up to 71-year-olds. Key findings here, surprise, surprise, periodization training was far superior to building strength versus non-planned training protocols. They did find that undulating in this study was that it was superior to linear training in untrained people, which kind of opposes that one that I spoke about before. That was the reverse. So anyway, that longer programs and higher weekly frequency programs had better gains in strength. So in a nutshell, periodization wins versus having no plan, and more frequent variations tends to win across the board. So the practical takeaways from this one was that for improvements in your 1RM goals, but being squatting heavier, benching heavier, leg pressing heavier, plan for an 8 to 12 week cycle, multiple sessions a week, 2 to 3 sessions per week for strength, and vary up your reps and your loads across those weeks. Undulate it is the recommendation there. So once again, it's interesting, conflicting research. You got one systematic review saying one thing, and this would be actually quite common in some research circles. You'll have one systematic review saying this one saying this one. Once again, it comes down to what works for the person sitting right in front of you, what works with their week, what works with their training habits, what works with their training history. All these kind of things will kind of dictate what you do. But the overriding message from both these papers are, have a plan. Don't just wing it.
Yeah, I'd add to that just with one more sentence and have a plan, but the plan should include some level of variety in your training,
Yep.
and that tends to get the best results.
Yep. Very good. So John had some interesting things also too to add, and some really great sort of practical tips on how we can sort of bring some of the training into real life. And so I asked him in this question, does the general population need a plan? And should they periodise? And this is what he had to say.
I think that's where periodization is really, really helpful. Even though I've totally, pulled out the rug from the scientific illusion
Yes.
that it presents, people need a program. I think it'd be a big mistake to just randomly train. So people need a program. But for me, I don't think we know much more from a scientific perspective other than you want to get better, then there needs to be some type of variation.
Yeah.
Second, that variation should be not too much. It's got to be baby bear's porridge. You don't do too much. Do stuff regularly, but no big jumps. And certainly in elite sport, where everyone should know better, the big problems come from often unseen increases in training load, whether that's intensity or volume. And you see this across the board in elite sport. Professional football happens all the time. Coach gets a kind of rush of blood to the head or is really cross with the players, and there's extras and there's extras. And lo and behold, people start getting injured. You see it if, someone like me, and maybe I'm running 5 times a week and I'm feeling really good. So, you know what? I'm going to push on. I'm going to do more. I'm going to hit another hill, whatever it is. You make you feel good the next day, maybe you do the same. But all of those unregulated, unconsidered decisions to, I feel this way, so I'm going to push on way beyond where I've gone before.
Yes.
That's where the risk comes. That's where you start approaching your break point, and that's where problems start, regardless of if it's your first day training. You jump in, you go too far, you break, or you're at the very elite end, you go too far, you break.
Yeah, so not nice take homes there, and I liked how he did sort of reference both himself as, that almost like the ego inside yourself, just, feeling good, go that little bit further. Then also too, you got the external voice saying, like the coach who's, really filthy at you or cranky at you because they don't think you're fit enough, so they push you harder. And it's those unplanned spikes in load that come back to bite you. And I think that we've all been there, especially those moments where you feel good. That's what I kind of really have to talk to my patients quite a lot about, is that you'll wake up some days feeling as fresh as a daisy, fit as a fiddle, and you go and you just get into this groove. You get this runner's high, and all of a sudden now you've doubled your previous longest distance you've done in the last few weeks, and then lo and behold, a week or two time, you're coming in with like some degree of pain or some symptom that's now hard to get on top of. I think those ego runs are sometimes hard to pull back on.
I always like to think of like exercise should have some variation, but you're working within kind of like a sinus wave, for instance, where you're going up and you're going down, you're going up and down, and that can definitely kind of increase over time or decrease over the time. But once those wavelengths become really steep and jagged and they look like sawtooths, for instance, that's when people come and see us, because that's where they'll get bone stress injuries, they'll get tendon issues, they'll have muscle problems, or joint pain. Yeah, if people kind of stayed in that zone, we would be a lot less busy.
Yep, agree. So I also asked John, how can we progress some of our training safely, and whether or not we need to factor in some deload periods as well. And this is what he had to say.
But the fundamental has to be, no matter how you organize it or what you call it, the increments have to be small.
Yeah.
If you get those increments perfectly right, then maybe you don't need to download, but no one can get them perfectly right, or you can't be sure. So it's not a 1-for-1 trade-off. If I push a bit harder and don't get injured, and I'll get a little bit of an extra fitness kick, is that better than making that decision, will I push an extra hill and you break? So I think there's an asymmetric risk here.
Yeah.
If I take the risk and it's good, I get a small benefit. But if it doesn't, I get set back by a big amount.
Yes.
So I think there's a very good argument for you always have a little safety zone.
Yeah.
Now, if you're, an elite 800-meter runner, you're going to have to push yourself to the very, very edge of your capacity now and again, but you don't do it too often, and you do it in a way when it's thought through and it's planned, and you're confident in it. And I think if you were to, if you were to pull all this together, I see two things. There's one is we push too hard too quick because we're feeling good. And the other thing is naturally, we're overconfident. And that's the biggest driver of decision-making error in training is overconfidence.
Yeah.
I feel good. I'm going to bust this, or whatever it is. I'm warmed up. I'm moving well. I know I was only going to do this much, but I'm going to do that much.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that comes back and catches you.
Yeah.
Because your brain might feel good. You're wide awake. You had a great night's sleep. The stars are aligned. And you're thinking, yeah, I'm going to kill it. That gets you into trouble. You do a couple of those back to back. You're not aware of it. But the fatigue is inbuilt there. Your coordination is slightly off. All the wheels start to come off.
I like the Goldilocks analogy that he's had, and I often use that in the clinic, but also to, probably just leave. And this is probably where the elite world may differ from, general population world, is that sometimes in the elite world, as he said, with the 800-meter runner, you're going to have to really push that red line, and probably a lot closer to the red line than most. But general population, we want to have that level of safety there because, we're not playing for sheep stations, when we're going to the gym to, try and, get a little bit fitter for life and to improve our quality of life and our wellness and our mental health and all those kind of things. We don't need to be, pushing the red line each and every training session. I think that level of safety conversation, I think is important. But elite world and elite performance does change quite a bit, and there often is a bit more of a red line that you got to get fairly close to more often than not.
It is, and it is literally the $1 million question in performance and elite sport, is that if you are wanting to win the Olympics or you're wanting to become the best footballer that you can be and go pro, a lot of athletes will take that gamble and say that I know that maybe I don't have quite the natural ability of like Ronaldo, for instance. So the only way I'm going to make it is if I train harder than everyone else. And that's their mindset. And they will go into it betting to say, all right, I may break down, but if I train in the safety zone and never push myself, I'm not going to make it either. So they'll place that bet and say, if my body can tolerate it, I've got a chance. But if I don't, I understand the consequences. And that's part of the art in sport. And for us as physios, that's part of the art in making sure you give people that opportunity as well, but they understand the risks.
Yep, absolutely. Last one from John, I asked, and I probably threw him under the bus a little bit here, or gave him a big curveball, is to give me a recommendation of how he might try and give us some his words of wisdom in under a couple of minutes. But he did his best, and this is what he had to say.
Okay, that's obviously a complicated question, but
Yes.
I do have kind of basic recommendations, and these aren't me coming up with these as insights of brilliance or anything like that. It is trial and error, because I have made every single mistake that you could possibly make. And I was that person going to college, working at night, competing at a decent level in a hard driving sport, training, and repeated cycles of injury, burnout, etc., etc. Every mistake I've made. I think the first thing I would do is I would start small. People don't do that. You buy the gym membership, you buy the t-shirt, whatever, you're into the gym for an hour and a half and that's it. And that's why people drop out after 3 weeks in January every year. It's got to be, you start small, you have to grow not just your physical fitness. The first thing you need to grow is a habit. Put on the shoes, get out the door, do the run. Even if it's 5 minutes, build a habit, and then you can start layering on the volumes, the intensities and that. So basic rule, I would say is build a habit. The habit will build the resilience, the robustness. There is no rule to say, here's how much you should push and here how much you should back off. My basic common sense rule would be always leave something in the tank.
Yep.
Don't go pushing to the edge. When I was coming through as an athlete, you know, we were kind of brought up with stories of legendary sessions. You know, you need to be doing this. You know, it's this many repeat 300s or whatever it was. But we got broke all the time because we thought it was all about the peak sessions, that's what drove fitness. But really, it's the consistency.
Yeah.
And if you think of consistency, then you don't have to be hitting peaks all the time. Peaks are dangerous. You can just keep, you know, tiny increase, and incrementally you will get better. And again, that's what, you know, the best endurance runners do. They'll all do slightly different things, but they stick to it and they do it a lot.
Yeah.
But for people like us to get to do it a lot, you have to start off, I'm going to do it small and I'm not going to break. Because if you get hurt and you're laid off, then you start again.
Yeah.
So you're in a constant, you know, boom or bust type cycle instead of, no, steady wins the race here.
Yeah, so a couple of really good points there. The one that got me was, peak is dangerous. Peaks are dangerous, and this, you know, slow, steady consistency is certainly an important thing we should be sort of striving for. But yeah, there's no but. Like it's what we need to be doing. I think people find that hard. They want to be fitter and stronger. You know, last week. And it's that habit that he also talked about at the start, I think, super important. You know, like it is hard to establish a habit, but it's got to be something. If you've got this, your why is to get better, and your why is to get better for your work or your partner or your kids, or, you know, because you've signed up to a marathon, that's your why. Like, you got to probably first and foremost figure out what your why is. Why are you doing this? Once you figure that out, I think that allows the habit to form probably a little bit easier. And then once that habit's formed, it's just not being greedy. I think that's probably the big overriding sort of theme here.
We've got Andrew Russell coming up in a few episodes, who I spent some time with as the head of fitness at Hawthorn when I was there. And he had some terrific statistics that showed that, and you should ask him about this when you catch up with him, that he could predict how AFL footballers, how many matches they would lose, and also what their performance was during the season by how much of the preseason they did. So the less they did, the more inconsistent they were in pre-season, the worse their season was. The more consistent their pre-season was, the better they played. So it's all about, and I totally agree with John's comments, is that when you build up that overall resilience of your body by doing repeated sessions, that will trump like big sessions any day of the week.
Yep. Love that. That's a really nice way to sort of round out this very interesting talk on periodization, mate. I learn a lot, and I love hearing different perspectives. You know, like we're probably probably been guilty of just finding agreeable people who just, you know, agree with what we're sort of presenting. It's nice to sort of, you know, have someone present something a little bit different. It's been good. I enjoyed it.
I love listening to John. I could listen to that accent all day.
Yeah, absolutely. Just quick closing here. In summary from the two papers I presented, basically for novices, there is slight benefits to having a linear program of just gradual changes over time. If you're trained, there is a slight favoritism between a daily or a weekly undulating program. If you want to get hypertrophy and you want to build massive muscles and be a bodybuilder, what the best way to go about that is just make sure your volume is at an adequate level for that muscle growth. They're probably the big three take-home points from a really interesting topic, mate. So I'm done if you're done.
Yeah, well summarised. Let's read it out.
Yeah. All right, mate. So, yeah, that's a wrap for this episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. A big thanks, as always, to our sponsors, Premax, high performance skincare for high performance people, and Learn.physio, world-class education for health professionals. We'll see you next time.
See you next week.